Hey everyone, today I'm doing the pregnancy Q&A. So a little while ago I put a question box up on Instagram and I was just asking for ideas on what you wanted to see in terms of video content, and obviously a lot of it was reno related and lifestyle related because that's kind of what my whole Instagram page is centered around. But about 50%, interestingly, was people asking questions about pregnancy and birth and like loads of different topics relating to pregnancy. So I put up another question box this week, just specifically asking for questions around pregnancy, birth, prep for mum life, like anything along those lines, and thought that I would do a Q&A on YouTube. I don't think that this long form video content is suitable for Instagram. And I'm well aware that the pregnancy, birth, mum stuff is really only of interest to some followers. So anyway, let's get started with one of the first questions. So this one came up a lot. How old am I and how old is Dan? So let's start with that. So we're both, well actually, I'm 35, he's 36, he just turned 36, and I will be 36 next week. So yes, that is kind of, well, they call me a geriatric. It's a geriatric pregnancy, which is hilarious because I personally don't feel old. I personally feel like this is like the best time of my life to have a baby, and I've definitely not regretted waiting this long. I think with my personality type, I definitely wanted to have things in order. I'm definitely type A, so I wanted to have the house in order, the renovations finished. I also wanted to have a career established, which I've done, and just to be financially stable. I think from what I have seen in the past, a lot of stresses can come from the finances when you're trying to raise a child. So I think for me, I just really wanted to, and Dan too, we both have always agreed that we really wanted to wait until the timing was right. We've been together for 19 years. Over that 19 years, there's been times where I've been unsure I even wanted to have children, just sort of enjoying that selfish lifestyle, and never fully committed to not having kids, but just wasn't sure for a few years there. So yeah, I think that has also probably delayed things, but if I'm honest, this renovation, we've been doing this for 3 years and we've been thinking about it for 3 years, and we just wanted to get the house finished. So that's why we've waited. The next question that I think would probably go after that would be the few on like the conception journey. So I think with conception, I'm very mindful that it's a very touchy subject. But I'm going to answer the questions honestly. I think that everybody has some kind of a journey. I don't think that anybody, and certainly anyone that I know, has a walk in the park through whether it's their pregnancy, whether it's trying to conceive, whether it's after the baby arrives. Like, everybody has different challenges. For us, we were very blessed. We did conceive naturally, which is something that's come up a fair bit. And how long did it take? It actually happened first try, so which obviously we're very grateful for. It was not what we expected. So personally, I have PCOS, which I've kind of been told from my doctor for a few years now that because of my age and PCOS, it was going to be difficult to conceive. So yeah, I think we just didn't expect it to happen straight away. So I have not been on the pill for over 10 years now. In 2012, I was on a high estrogen pill that actually caused blood clots in my lungs, and I literally nearly died from it. And it's caused challenges throughout the rest of my life because of that. So I think that potentially not being on the pill for so long may have played a role. I'm not sure. Because I haven't been on the pill, obviously I've been very careful in terms of making sure that I didn't get pregnant through various methods. So when it came time to, starting the journey and wanting to conceive, I'm very aware of when that commenced. It was very planned. As I said, I'm a type A personality, so it was planned to the nth degree. So for 6 months or so leading up to conception, there were quite a few things that we did. So we talked about, obviously, first thing was private health insurance to cover, because I'm very much, this is another question, wanting to have the birth through the private system. So you need to have that in order basically 12 months before. So we had started thinking about that for, for a year beforehand. Sorry, just needed a drink of water. So we started thinking about private health insurance. So I took out the private health insurance and kind of worked out dates based on that. Within that time frame, we also, because we thought it was going to be a difficult journey, we commenced fertility acupuncture, so Japanese acupuncture, which we both did. Dan loves acupuncture. He's used that a lot throughout his life with sporting injuries and things like that. So he's a big pro acupuncture person, and we'd read a lot of benefits around fertility. So we actually did start having acupuncture in the lead up. We changed our diet. We started drinking less alcohol, which was hard at the time, because we were drinking like every night. I love wine, as you probably know if you've been following for some time. I also started switching to a lot of natural products in the lead up. So I can probably go into that in another video, or just reach out if you're interested, but I made so many shifts, everything from deodorant, which was a nightmare because all natural deodorants don't really work. There's only been a couple that I could recommend, right through to like makeup, skincare products, loads of things for that 6 months. We went to see a naturopath. We started taking prenatal supplements as well for 6 months leading up to, my understanding was through my naturopath that the egg quality is extremely important, and it's a 3-month cycle basically. So we wanted to start doing the right things to make sure that the eggs, I don't even know if this makes sense, but basically whatever it is to do with that particular cycle, it's 3 months. And so we wanted to make sure that I did as much as I could to be as healthy as possible before we started that journey. I think that's probably the main things that we did. And then this is how ridiculous I am, but and I still use it, it's an app called Flow that tracks your menstrual cycle, and you can put in there your ovulation. So I started tracking my ovulation for about a year in the lead up to become really familiar with all those gory details. And I was tracking that, through the app. And it was to the point where I said to Dan, we're going to start our conception journey in February. Why don't we book a little trip away for that first weekend? Because I could see on my Flow app when I was going to be ovulating. So we literally, like a couple of months beforehand, booked the trip for February based on the Flow app of when I should be ovulating, which in the end was spot on. So yeah, we literally went away to Byron and commenced our conception journey. And I tracked that in the app kind of like every single day. I think there was 9 attempts throughout that period. I was really set on having a girl, and this is a total overshare, but this is what we're here for. And I had read that you should have sex every second day, but we had been having sex every day, and I was getting all caught up in the detail because I didn't want to overdo it. So anyway, in the end we had a girl, so it didn't seem to matter. I was just at that point like, let's just go for it and try and just conceive. And if we have a boy, that would be a blessing. So yeah, that was kind of how that all went. And then you have this wait period, like, there's only a certain time every month that you can fall pregnant, which you don't realize until you go into this journey. It's actually really hard to fall pregnant. So you kind of go through, they call it the 2-week wait, when you're waiting to find out if you're pregnant or not. And of course it consumes you. Like, I was completely consumed by it, and I feel so sorry for people who have to be consumed by that for months and years on end, because I guess it's really hard to think about anything but that, even though we didn't think that we were going to fall pregnant first go. So when we could, at the earliest point, I took a pregnancy test because I just couldn't wait. I think I took it a couple of days early and it was positive, which was crazy. It was just one normal day. We were both going to work. That you're supposed to do it first thing in the morning, which is when I tested. I did record myself telling Dan, but it was super calm. We weren't really overly excited, which is sad now that I look back because we should have celebrated, but I think we were just in shock, like thinking, okay, it's come up positive, but we're so aware of the statistics around miscarriage and particularly in the early stages, and because it was so early, it was kind of just like, okay, well, we can tick the next box. You know, we've gone through all these steps to this point, we've now conceived, but we just didn't want to get overly excited. We didn't want to be in a position where we were getting really attached and setting ourselves up for, you know, being really upset if there was a miscarriage. And, you know, I'm aware that we tested so early. So yeah, anyway, obviously it all worked out because every week that went by, we didn't have any issues and we were so blessed. And I think with each week we became more and more excited, and it wasn't really until I had the nip test that I was willing to celebrate, because I'm so aware of, as I said, you know, my age and things like that, and how that can play into miscarriage and chromosomal abnormalities. So yeah, it wasn't really until we did the nip test that we properly celebrated and announced it. But yeah, that's basically the journey and how we conceived. And as I might go into detail shortly, although that was a walk in the park and we're so grateful, my pregnancy journey has not been a walk in the park. So like I said before, I do think that everybody has challenges. So next question, which is probably suitable in terms of timeline, is quite a few questions around how to handle pregnancy nausea, how to cope with morning sickness. Like, I feel so sorry for everybody who has messaged me. It is awful. There's a couple of questions here around, well, one in particular, how did you cope with the lifestyle change in the first trimester? I'm 11 weeks and hardly leave the sofa. Oh my God. So I do have a couple of things to say on this. I was extremely sick. It hit me at about week 6. Started off just feeling a little bit nauseous and thinking, oh, is this all in my head? But yeah, then it just became so intense. It just got really bad. And to the point where I was vomiting every day. And even worse is the nausea. So it was like having food poisoning for 6 weeks straight. At least with some sicknesses, like you can throw up and then you feel relief. I just never felt that relief. Like the nausea was so intense all day. It was like that feeling when you're so sick you're about to throw up, that heightened awful sick feeling, and it just didn't really leave me. Like it would kind of ebb and flow a little bit, but oh God, like most of the day was just a struggle. I was so sick that I wouldn't even read a book. I didn't step outside the house for over 5 weeks. Like literally didn't step into my backyard, apart from one night when I had to escape the smell of something that Dan was cooking. I'll never forget that moment. But yeah, it was horrendous. I've never been so sick and for so long. I was so depressed. I think as well the hard thing about that time frame is that you haven't announced you're pregnant. You're too sick to go to work, so I had to keep lying to my boss about what was wrong. You can't tell anybody what's going on, and you're going through all of this knowing the stats around miscarriage and thinking, you know, some of the horrible stories that I've heard and really unfortunate situations that I've seen play out, you're just kind of consumed by that. So you're so sick and you're not sure if it's all going to be even worth it. And yeah, I think the worst part is just not being able to tell anyone. Like I didn't tell anybody at that point apart from my family. So I think it's the worst part of pregnancy that would be the worst part, that first trimester. And you're also not sure if it's going to ever stop. Like, especially for me, my sister had HG with both of her pregnancies. So for me, there was, there was this high chance that I would have hyperemesis gravidarum, which means basically what I was experiencing would continue right through to the end of the pregnancy. So it didn't, thankfully. So how to handle it and what my tips would be. I listened to, before conceiving, this is again my type A personality, before conceiving on Mark grabbed the stack of books. I read so many books and listened to tons of podcasts before February, before the conception journey. And one of them was the Bump podcast. And there's a couple of episodes where they talk about pregnancy sickness. And one of the girls' dads, Dr. Timmy, comes on. He's an obstetrician. And I think there's like a good hour episode of how to handle pregnancy sickness. So I would definitely recommend listening to that. I took a lot of tips from that and then was able to be prepared. So before I actually felt sick and I knew I was pregnant, I did go to see my GP and got a bunch of scripts for Maxilon and ondansetron or Zofran, just to have ready, because I knew that there was a chance I was going to be quite sick. I think with medication, there's a lot of, how do I put it? Just uncertainty around the safety and the pros and cons. All I would say is that taking Zofran, from my research, it only gives like an increase, 2% risk of a heart defect and 2% risk of a cleft palate. It's under 2%. But if you weigh up, the cons of like the sickness and not tackling the sickness and being so sick like I was that you can't eat anything, you can't take your prenatal, you're not getting all of those essential nutrients that you need from your prenatal, that for me was, I think, the key reason why I decided to take the risk with the Zofran, knowing how small the risks were and knowing how big the risks were of not taking a prenatal and things like that. So I kind of weighed that all up and decided to take the medication, and I was still violently ill for 6 weeks, so I'd hate to think of how I would have been without it, but at least I was able to, on most days, hold down my prenatal, even though my diet was just atrocious. All I was kind of eating back then was spinach, potatoes of any type, and then like meagering noodles and things like that. So I would definitely say don't be afraid to use the medication, because the other thing is your mental health. Like, my mental health definitely suffered in those first 12 weeks. And I just needed to do anything that I could to help my mental health and my physical health, and to help with my body getting all the essential nutrients that it needed. Other things are, as you probably know, to keep eating regularly. I did find that difficult, obviously, when you're feeling as sick as I was. But what I did find worked was eating different things every day. So bless Dan for going to Coles every single day. I remember this, except for over the Easter period when there was public holidays and Coles was closed. But he literally went to Coles every single day. So it was just like our routine. What might you stomach today? And I would text. And I remember it would just make me feel so sick even thinking about what to like order from Coles. But every day he would go and get different foods. So I was trying lots of different snacks and things, which seemed to help, because I think once you've thrown up something, you don't want to ever eat that again. So it's just a lot of variety and lots of plain foods. Otherwise, the other thing is, where possible, like obviously just not going to work and telling whatever lies you need to just get through that period, or if you can, be open with your employer to just let them know what's going on. I didn't tell my employer. I personally just didn't want that out there, because I did have that fear of miscarriage, and I didn't want to share that with my employer in case I had to then a couple of weeks later say, well, I've had a miscarriage, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I wanted to keep that to myself, even though I trust my employer and I've worked there for 15 years. I didn't want to share that. But I do think the good thing was having so much sick leave, because I've been there for 15 years. I had like over 150 days or something, 140 days maybe, I can't remember, of sick leave to use. So I used that, and I just think it's important to rest, because leaving the house when you're this sick is just impossible. So mindful, I've been waffling on for ages now, so I'm going to try and get through. I think these are some of the more meatier questions. Some quick fire ones. So what are your birth plans? What pregnancy care have you had? There's quite a few around the pregnancy care. What model of care are you doing for pregnancy, birth and postpartum? All those sorts of things. So I've gone for a private model. I think that's what you would call it. So I've got an obstetrician who I see, plus a midwife who's linked to a team of midwives, but I've got one specific midwife who I see regularly. And so she'll continue to support me after the birth. And she will be there for the birth, in addition to my obstetrician and a paediatrician as well. So I've got a private paediatrician that I haven't seen yet, but they will attend the birth, and then I will continue to see that paediatrician after the birth. The other one was, what are my birth plans? Okay, so that's come up a lot. People are so intrigued by this, and I'm very open and happy to share that. So I'm having an elective cesarean. The reason being, as I said earlier, because I had blood clots in my lungs in 2012, which were caused by a high estrogen pill that I was on. I am currently every day doing injections. So I inject my stomach, which is awful. And I've got huge bruises all over the sides of my stomach from doing that. But I'm basically on blood thinners to stop my blood from clotting, because obviously you have way higher estrogen in your body when you're pregnant compared to even a high estrogen pill. So that's a preventative. So because of that, I can't just go into a spontaneous labor. So I would need to either have a planned induction or a completely drug-free birth, because when you're on these sorts of drugs, there's certain things that you can't do. So you can't get an epidural or a spinal, for example. And I just don't want to have an induction personally. I feel like if I can't go into spontaneous labor and have a natural, if you want to call it, birth, then I may as well just have a cesarean, because for me it's planned, it's safer, I can time the injections. We do have a backup plan if she comes early, but it's just the more safer and controlled way. And yeah, I just know so many people who have ended up having an emergency cesarean. Like, I don't know whether it's just my group of friends, but like nearly all of them have had emergency cesareans, and family members. So yeah, I think for me, I'd rather just have it planned. I am well aware of pros and cons of both. Like, I researched this to death before we even started conceiving. But yeah, I'm ready for it and I'm excited about it. And I think being type A, I do like that there's an element of control, and I do know what to expect in terms of the day, the process, the healing. So I feel like I'm as prepared as I can be. And that's happening very soon. There's only a couple of weeks left. Next question. When or do you intend to bub into childcare? So in relation to daycare, I would like to personally hold off on putting my child into daycare as long as I can. I'm not sure how that's going to look. We're quite fortunate that Dan's mum is going part-time this year at work, so she can be more involved. There's the potential there that we will have her and myself and Dan to just look after our child. Dan owns his own company and is definitely in a position where he could also go to 4 days. And the type of work that he does, there's absolutely no reason why 1 day a week he can't be at home with her. And then for my work, you know, if I want to go back 3 days, for example, that is absolutely not an issue. So yeah, I think that we will try to avoid daycare as long as possible. And then the next question, sort of along those lines. Oh, actually I've skipped something from previous. Have you had any cravings? I don't know. I don't think I've had cravings. Like, for me, a craving would be something like you hear about women saying to their husband, like, oh, you've got to go to McDonald's at 3 a.m. in the morning because I need a hash brown or whatever. I haven't had anything like that. I've definitely had things that I felt like, But when you're not pregnant, you feel like things as well, right? Like I feel like pizza for dinner tonight, or something. I think the only thing I would say that has been a shift in things that I feel like eating is fruit. And yeah, that's one of those things that people say if you're having a girl, you might like more sweets and fruits and things like that. So I have been loving fruit throughout my pregnancy. So I guess you could say that would fall into the category of cravings. Another strange one is bacon. Dan commented that he'd noticed I'd been buying bacon a little bit more throughout the pregnancy, and I thought, yeah, that's definitely true. Like I've definitely felt like bacon, which is not something that I would usually eat very often because I don't think it's very good for you. So yeah, maybe you could add bacon to the list. So the other one, I remember seeing this one, private or public school. If private, will you put her name down at birth? So I'm personally not too concerned about private versus public. I went to a private primary school initially and then went to 7 different schools, most of which were state schools, including homeschooling in between, because my mum renovated houses and she would renovate and sell and move. So my whole life I had to really adapt. What I would say from personal experience is I do think that the education is better in a private school. I have experienced that firsthand, so that is something that makes me really want to lean towards private. The other thing I would say is I've worked in the recruitment industry for 15 years and I have seen firsthand the discrimination that can happen depending on what industry and what sort of profession, but certain employers will favour absolutely certain schools and absolutely private schools over public when they're recruiting. So if they've got a short list of candidates to consider and they've got candidates that have gone to a private school or a public school, there are absolutely, I guarantee you, certain employers and people within those companies who will select to interview totally biased and not fair at all, but it's not something that's being stamped out yet. It's still happening. So I think, it depends on the profession, but to set our child up for success and to not face that sort of discrimination should they choose to go into a field like legal or accounting, for example, then I think it would be ideal. But personally, I spent more time in public schools and I think Dan and I turned out okay. So that's a really tough one. I did always envisage sending my child to a particular private school in Brisbane, but our plans are to not be living in Brisbane in a few years from now. We want to be living on the coast. We want to be living close to family because we're only having one child, which actually is another question in there, so there you go. Because we're only having one at this stage anyway, I think it's really important for her to be around her cousins who are super close in age. So my sister just had a baby a few months ago, and she's got two girls, so my 2 nieces, so I think it would just be really nice for them to grow up closely. So I don't know, I've got to research private schools on the coast, but personally I do see us going towards a private school, definitely. So the final question, this person's obviously been following me for quite some time. So they obviously know that I was unsure about having kids, because I do get asked that on Instagram and I've shared that a few times about whether we're having kids or not. So what has the process been like for you going from unsure about having kids to now? So I think that process has been pretty slow. I think it was, I think when my sister had a baby, because I'm obsessed with my niece, like I was just like, wow, this is that love that everybody talks about, like your heart's exploding, like so obsessed with her. I think when she was born, that was probably the main switch, and Dan always knew that was going to happen. Like he's always wanted to have kids, but he's been with me on my journey of, yes, no, unsure, over 19 years. But he kind of said, I know as soon as your sister has a baby, you're going to be just all over it. And he was so right. That was probably the biggest shift for me. Like I remember one Christmas having all the family here and having her here, and it was just amazing. Like we had so much fun. It was just so much more special. And then when everyone went home, it was like, it just felt like something was missing. Like every Christmas we do our tradition, like Dan and I open a bottle of red for Christmas night, and it's just the two of us and our dog, and it's beautiful. But yeah, that year it just felt like something was missing, and I started thinking more about it and getting to a process with the house at that point where we still had so much to do, but I could just see myself getting ready for the next chapter. Like, what do we do when this house is finished? We've got this big, beautiful house, and it's just the two of us and a dog, and yeah, like we work so hard, and we're both, you know, I would say quite successful with what we've achieved in his company and my corporate career, and we earn good money, and it's like, what's all that for? And yes, it's amazing having beautiful overseas holidays and flying business class and first class and things like that we've been able to do, but you start to think like, who are you sharing those memories with? Who are you coming home to? And if you're only getting 6 weeks leave a year from your employer, which is what I would get for your holidays, then what are you doing outside of that? That's kind of what I started thinking. So yeah, I think it was just a process of getting older, thinking about the next chapter, thinking about everything that we'd achieved and what was to come, and just, it must have just been the right timing. I think financially we were ready, mentally we were ready. So that's the process. And I waited, and I'm so glad that I didn't do this before I was ready, because just now is just feels so ready, and obviously everything's happened so perfectly. We're so blessed. So yeah, that's what the process has been. Sorry, I totally waffled on a bit there. So I think I'm gonna finish it there. I might do another one, we'll see. I've only got a couple of weeks left before I'm actually having this baby, and then don't know how much time I'm gonna have for YouTube videos, but sorry if I didn't get to your question, and thank you for those who did reach out. I think it's really special that I've been running this Instagram page for 6 years and showing more and more about personal life over the last few years, and it's special that people are interested and that they want to know more about us and our journey and our personal life. So thank you for being interested, and thank you for your support, and I hope that that has been interesting and potentially useful. If you have any other questions, let me know. I'm like so keen to help support anyone who's struggling in any way, because particularly around the sickness and the mental health side of things in the first trimester. So if there's anything more that I can do to support you, or any tips, or if there's anything else you want to know, just reach out. Otherwise, that's it. I'm going to sign off because I've been talking way too much, and I will see you all again very soon.